Once upon a time, I was unsuspectedly scrolling Twitter, or X, when next thing I knew, I was joining a peacekeeping trip to Israel and Palestine. And it's thanks to random online interactions with today's guest, Nathan Perrin, that led me to partner with the organization Community Peacemaker Teams, where he is the co-chair of the steering committee. I think I first connected with Nathan because he's a fiction writer, but then I realized this guy is doing the Lord's work over in Chicagoland and beyond. And he must have a way with words because, much to my mother's chagrin, I'm headed to Palestine this November with CPT, thanks to his connections and endorsement. If you want to donate to that, I will put a link in the show notes. But enough about me. Let's see what Nathan has to say about Middle East activism as a Christian. Welcome to Theology Meets World, hosted by me, Jake Doberenz. This podcast delves into the heart of real-life issues with theologians, ministers, activists, and writers who share their unique stories and insights. Keep up with the show at jakedoberenz.com/TMW. And subscribe to updates and weekly funny newsletters at jakedoberenz.substack.com. Don't forget to rate and review the show and share it with your friends and your enemies. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on, Jake.
Absolutely. It is good to have you here. I know we've chatted via Zoom before, but most of our interactions have been online. And so it's always good to talk to you face to face, even if that's digitally mediated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's always great to talk. And yeah, glad my chaotic Twitter presence brought you into my orbit.
Yeah, like I said, I don't quite recall exactly how we got connected, but we did, and that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's my favorite dumpster fire, as I keep telling people. So it's for moments like these.
Absolutely, and I still call it Twitter, and I can't quite change from that.
Oh, I'm never going to change.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's jump in. Nathan, you had an experience that profoundly shaped your life. You visited an Assyrian Christian village in northern Iraq. Why were you there in the first place, and how did that visit impact your faith?
Yeah, so, gosh, every time I tell this history, I'm kind of stunned by how long I've been hanging around, these kind of circles. So it was when I first graduated college. Well, only time I graduated college, but yeah, I just graduated with my bachelor's, and I had just been convicted of peacemaking. And, the Middle East had been a very special place in my heart. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, or near there, around the Palestinian community. And something else that kind of influenced me was the kind of this punk rock ethos of if you see something wrong, it's up to you to change it kind of mentality. Which, has some problematic undertones to it when I look back at it, but, that's what formed me. I can't deny it. So I decided that I wanted to explore peacemaking more. And at the time, the organization was Christian Peacemaker Teams before we made the official transition to be more out with our multi-faith lens. So I applied to Iraqi Kurdistan, and this was September of 2017. So it was about 4 months between graduation and then. I had started a pastorate up in rural Wisconsin in a town of 35 people. And so people thought I was kind of crazy. I come from a Quaker Mennonite background, so there's like these pockets of rural churches everywhere, kind of like that. And so, yeah, I flew over there. It was probably the most profoundly spiritual formation experiences of my life. I feel like I experienced both the best and the worst of humanity just through this amazing delegation experience. So when we were there, they were going through a referendum, the Kurdish region of Iraq, to become its own nation state. And, it was voted in, supported massively at the time. But due to kind of U.S. government interference and also with the Iraqi government itself, that has a very anti-Kurd, anything that divides a kind of country. They weren't able to achieve that nation state. But when I was there, it was kind of an uncertain and exciting time. I was there for about 2 weeks. So CPT's work, or Community Peacemaker Team, they focus on the cross-border bombardments from Turkey and Iran, or at least at the time. This was 7 years ago. And every time, there was a bombardment along these villages, they would go out and visit. And like they're the only organization working in the region to report these injustices, right? And so one of the villages that was getting bombed was an Assyrian Christian village named Kishkawa. And it was about, I believe, 5 miles from Dupre, which was a Kurdish Muslim village. Now, at this Assyrian Christian village, Saddam Hussein, during his regime, he went and destroyed the church and community multiple times. The army took the cross and used that as like target practice, stuff like that. And every time they chose to rebuild. And I think it was anywhere from 5 to 7 times that church was destroyed. And when I was visiting, I had just been kind of convicted to peacemaking, I think about 2016. And so I was trying to figure out what this meant. And so it was during this Assyrian church service. Syriac, kind of like a language very similar to the language Jesus spoke, was being, used in the Mass and liturgy. The only phrase I heard from the translator, because it's really loud in there, I saw video clips of it, but the only phrase I heard was, Jesus wants us to be the church to the world. And that really shifted my focus from this kind of very individualistic exploration of faith to understanding that I have a role in helping to repair the world. And when I stepped outside, I saw that cross with the bullet holes in it. And I heard someone say, we keep it up as a sign of defiant hope. And, I looked through the corner and there was a bunch of candles lit. And at the time, at 2017, I think it was a few months before this, there was a fight between ISIS and the Iraqi government because ISIS had seized control of Mosul. And so a bunch of Christians had fled there. They were hiding out at this village. And so when I looked to my left, I saw the prayer candles. And I just remember it was chills. But probably the most touching testimony of it all was that, the Assyrians have a very traumatic history. I mean, 75% of their population was genocided. And a huge portion that was from Turks who would pay like Kurdish militias, and other militias to come and exterminate. And, to this day, Assyrians do not trust. There's like a cultural distrust of like Kurds. There's a cultural distrust of Arabs, Americans, all that. And whenever the cross-border bombardments started happening, though, they actually gave their keys to their Kurdish Muslim neighbors. And their neighbors also had their keys, right? So anytime there was a bombardment in either village, they would use each other's houses as safety. And in the Kurdish Muslim village in Dupre, there was also a lot of like faith-inspiring stuff there. For instance, we visited a woman's home where there was like a hole in the ceiling that had only been patched up on the outside. And that hole was due to a missile falling through. And she decided to only patch it up on the outside until her justice was resolved. It's just like those like moments of like, I'm going to recognize the wrong thing that happened to me. And I'm going to see to it that the world's a better place or else kind of thing. And it was beautiful. So yeah, that's what really shifted things for me. And when I returned from that experience, I started reading the works of, Jürgen Moltmann, Miroslav Volf, those folks to help piece stuff together. And then, I came out a very different Christian from that experience, from someone who was, your standard American Christian who didn't know much better, someone who, is willing to go the extra length to participate in what I view as God's resurrection of the world and restoration of how things should be. So that's kind of, and I also, since then, gosh, I can't believe there's so much history here already. Yeah, so I studied Syriac Orthodoxy for 2 years in grad school, and it was specifically about their peacemaking theology. And then I ended up working longer term with Assyrian Christians stateside. And yeah, that's also really not going into the other Middle Eastern groups I've been involved with, people groups I've been involved with over the years. But yeah, that's the 10-minute version.
Well, I mean, chills. I mean, when you're talking about the cross with the bullet holes on it, and got some chills there, truly. But that was a great introduction to the introduction of your work and how you got involved in all of that. And I want to follow it up with what kind of seems like a silly question to you or I. But I want to know, why should Christians care about what happens over in the Middle East? And here's my phrase I coined: what hath Baghdad do with Chicago? What hath Baghdad do with Chicago, Nathan?
How much time you got?
Not too much time, but
yeah.
Say what you need to say.
So, yeah, the Middle East, in short, is in the mess it's in is because of terrible Western church theology, a large part of it. And it really is rooted from how the land was divided after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The British had a huge role in that. And during the Armenian genocide, there was a refusal to kind of recognize it from American Christians at the time, or to give aid, because they were more concerned about the property damage than they were about the people being lost. And when evangelical missionaries showed up to the Middle East, like this was 100 years ago, they were literally paying people to convert. And so, yeah, there's a lot of damage that's been done, in Christ's name in the Middle East. And that just never changed over the past 100 or so years. So that's one reason why you should care. Another reason why you should care when it relates to all of that is, what I view as very, bad theology as far as eschatology and end times views. The Middle East is seen less as a real place with people who are, just trying to live their lives, who just want the same freedoms as a good majority of the world. Instead, it's viewed as this theological playground where, when the Palestine crisis started, well, okay, it started in 1948, but like when October 7th happened, you could immediately see in the Christian American community that for years, these topics were not talked about very specifically, because to them, like Arab culture, all of that, it's all monolith. It just has an important role to play in the end times. When really it's anti-Semitic, it's anti-Arab. When we strip people of their humanity so we can win fights in seminary classrooms, we're on the wrong side of the cross. So, yeah, that's one reason you should care. But on the positive note, there's a lot of historic, amazing things about the Middle East that directly connect to Scripture. Not in a prophetic way, just like things are just still around, like Assyrians, their culture, like Nineveh. I visited the region there in Kurdistan. There's people groups that are talked about in the Scripture that still have their roots there. And in fact, there's entire Christian communities that trace their roots back to the Apostle Paul. But there's also Gnostic, religions that are still around Iraq. The Medeans, for instance, are, I believe, in the southern region. They're a Gnostic sect that began when they started to follow John the Baptist. And when you look at John 1, you see him kind of trying to distinguish between Jesus's messiahship and John the Baptist and what role he had to play. And it's because of communities like the Medeans who worship and view John the Baptist as a prophet. And they don't elevate Jesus. And, there's also stuff, it's very friendly culture. A lot of people thought I would face aggression as a Western Christian. But my experiences with the Assyrian, Arab, Kurds, they're like the most friendly people on the face of the planet. Like, I love being around them. There's a generosity there. There's a genuine kindness there that you very rarely get in American culture. There's an openness to talk about hard things, and just the warmth and embrace that I feel by Middle Eastern, North African communities. Like, I cannot find that much stateside. So even when someone from the Middle East is upset with you, they go out their way to say good morning, or they find a way to compliment the very depths of your humanity before telling you you're a bad person. It's just that cultural expectation of like kindness. And that always throws people off. But it's just like, that's just been their cultural tradition, is to always welcome in the outsider. So, yeah. And so, Christians should care about that, but also, a lot of churches are engaging in anti-racism work. And it's always been on a white and black binary. And I'm someone that believes passionately that until we include Middle Eastern, North African folks into this conversation of anti-racism, we're not going to be able to address the issues fully. And it's because this community has been under surveillance for the past 20 years, ever since 9/11. It's because they still continue to get harassed. Hate crime has gone up both in multiple communities that are even associated with that region. I mean, Jews too have been getting discrimination. So until we have a conversation nationwide as a church to discuss the racism and discrimination these communities face stateside, I don't know how we could honestly label ourselves as making any progress in this area. So yeah, that's why Christians should care about what happens in the Middle East, because anything that has anything to do with American foreign policy in the Middle East directly relates back to hate crimes and the rise of it towards Middle Eastern communities stateside. There's actual studies that back that up. So when October 7th began, there was somebody around Chicagoland, there was a kid that was stabbed. I got frequent reports from folks around here who were just terrified and being told that, you need to leave America, all this stuff. So, racism against them is a very real thing. And yeah, so Christians should care in a holistic way, and also just own how terrible theology contributed to this problem, but also recognize that, as a global church, we're essentially worshiping someone who had more in common with a Palestinian than someone as a Western evangelical.
Yeah, amen. Well, you've done exactly what I wanted to do here on Theology Meets World. You talked about how, hey, this theology matters to what happens in the world and how we treat people and that kind of thing. And you're right, a lot of that American Western theology has done some considerable damage over there. So thank you for your candid answers and multiple responses. And you could have just said, Jesus, but I liked what you said better, much more detailed. Yeah. I really want to put some legs on the theology, run around with it. What does it actually look like to practice Middle East activism for the Middle East in the United States of America? What can Christians do right here, right now, who might be sitting in the West for people half a world away?
Well, for my context, I'm working with a group called Men in Action, a chapter in Chicago, in the Chicago area. So we have the largest Palestinian community in the United States. We actually have a section in Chicago called Little Palestine around the suburbs. So my first, a piece of advice to Christians for any kind of Middle East activism is to first get to know the neighbors before reading about the region, because their neighbors who are like refugees or immigrants from that region will have more information to give and much more of a rich history to give than most books you will pick up. The second thing relates to my kind of last answer, or answer before that, is that in white Christian circles, we've treated the Middle East as a theological playground for the past 100 or so years. We need to humanize, first of all, people, and we need to listen to what they need. And so the activism I've been doing is I've just been present. The phrase ministry of presence comes to mind, right? Whenever I join in a protest or whenever I do a town hall, it's just this ministry that I'm recognizing your pain. And, it's just, that's what you do. You show up and you're willing to do the hard stuff alongside them because, frankly, the way the Palestinian community, at least within the United States, is seeing the Western Christian community, they're not seeing Jesus. They're not seeing this gospel we claim to believe, right? So by showing up and by just being present and listening, that's the first step always. And then let kind of the Spirit direct you from there. But be willing to challenge the assumptions you have in yourself and in your heart as you're doing this work. And I love seeing Christians out there. It's not like a hostile thing. We have this huge banner we carry around with us that just says Christians for ceasefire. And they love it when we show up because it gives them hope that there's Christians out there who are knowledgeable about this, who do want to do the work.
Beautiful. Yeah, again, that's beautiful. And that's great advice and something we can all really actionably do pretty easily. I'll have to admit, though, I'm not really familiar with a lot of those communities in my own city, but that's something I can make an effort to seek out for sure. So, I mean, we've kind of touched on this in different ways, but you alluded earlier that Community Peacemaker Teams used to be called Christian Peacemaker Teams, and they changed the name to reflect some of that kind of interfaith work that they were doing. And because you work in an interfaith organization, and I know you intersect with a lot of different faiths, I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about how you go about interacting with people of other faiths and the kind of work you do with them. Just what does interfaith advocacy look like? What does that mean for a Christian to work in those spaces?
If it's a healthy interfaith space, everyone's coming in with a perspective that we're not going to fundamentally change each other's perspective or identity. And it's mainly just a goal for a peaceful, loving outcome that we're working alongside each other in the world. And so my theology has space for that because I approach Christianity with kind of an open hand, that I don't see challenges or differing perspectives as threats. I know some folks who want to do interfaith work who still kind of clutch on to Christianity as if, if one part of how I understand faith is wrong, then it's all wrong kind of mentality. But no, when you actually enter into these conversations, you start to learn more about yourself, about your own security and your own faith. You learn a bunch just about different worldviews. And so, and my theology also says that, the Quaker understanding that everyone is kind of born with this knowledge of God, and everyone's just doing their best to try to reach God. And it's just being merely present to the Spirit's work in other people and allowing God to be God. And so, that's how I kind of view it, is that, the fact that they're there to work alongside us, it doesn't communicate anything about my faith. It communicates that we both care about the cause we're working for so much that we're willing to work together. And the goal of any healthy interfaith or multi-faith organization, with whatever religion you represent, the goal is always to try to outlove each other. And that's what creates a better world.
Outlove each other. You heard it here, folks. Outlove each other. That is a fantastic mission that, unfortunately, many Christians need to learn. You'd think that'd be taught in Sunday school a little bit better, but that is a struggle for some people. Anyway.
Some people.
But hopefully not the kind listeners of Theology Meets World. Not you guys. You guys already got this. But we can all still grow no matter what. So, Nathan, we talked about the Middle East and activism and interfaith stuff. As we sort of wind down more or less, I wanted to briefly talk about your fiction and how maybe that overlaps with your theology and faith and maybe activism and work. I don't know. I'm a fiction writer as well. I write really highbrow works like Super Jake and the Fashion Police. But something tells me your writing's a little bit different. It doesn't feature, middle schoolers that shoot ice cream out of their hands and fly around. I'm happy to be wrong, but you have a book coming out in 2025 called Memories of Green Rivers. And I just was hoping real quickly, or however long you want to take, you could talk about the role that faith plays in your fiction writing. And then also, of course, tell us Where can people read that stuff that you write?
Okay, yeah, so this is always a complicated question for me because my faith comes out in ways I don't expect it in my work. But the goal when I first began writing was to write realistic fiction with a spiritual focus that was kind of broad, that could speak to everyone. And so, yeah, like Memories of Green Rivers, though, that is partially taken from my own experiences in Kurdistan, but also doing the work over the years. It's about a human rights worker trying to readjust to the United States after his traumatic service there and after a bad divorce. And I wasn't living in Chicago at the time I was writing this. I was actually visiting for a job interview. But I wrote that in a hotel room, and the job of the main character was this refugee worker and all that. And as I discovered while writing it, I think I accidentally rewrote the Book of Job. It's stuff like that always comes out. So my faith, because it's such a personal, deep part of me, it just will always come out in some way. And I'm not always in control of how that looks. And it's a really interesting dynamic. But yeah. And so, in 2025, Memories of Grand Rivers will come out with Running Wild Press. Yeah, I'm also a screenwriter and regular writer for an organization called Rinio, which is a media company, a nonprofit based in Chicago. It's Assyrian. So if you actually look up Rinyo, Rinyo, on YouTube, you'll see a lot of animated shorts there for kids and stuff like that. I'm currently on staff with them to write a very special project that'll be coming out in October. I can't divulge much information about that, but there'll be a animated series from that. And a sitcom is in the works. So, yeah. But my fiction, the stuff I really like to write, the recent article that came out, I think in Publishers Weekly, Sad Boy Lit. I think that just kind of describes my fiction right there, Sad Boy Lit. It's people just dealing with really intense stuff and trying to make sense of it. But I also write some spooky stuff too, and I write devotionals, the way you gotta do. So,
sure. What are you gonna do? So you don't write about superheroes with ice cream powers or anything?
I don't know where my writing's gonna take me. One day, maybe.
There we go. That's the right answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm with you. I've been in the kind of the art and faith space for a long time. I've founded and produced a long-running podcast, Creatively Christian. So I've talked to people a lot about this kind of subject, and yeah, it ultimately kind of comes down to, it's like, faith's a part of me. It just sort of spills out when it's such a part of your identity. You can't stop it. And I found that in my most recent book, in Super Jake and the Hacker, which is just a zany, ridiculous book. All of a sudden, I end up writing what I think is a decent case for nonviolence and for not seeking revenge, and all this kind of stuff comes out. Loving enemies. It's like, oh, well, where'd that come from? They're fighting cat robots. How did that happen? But,
cat robots don't have souls.
Rinio, that seems super fascinating, and I'll be checking that out and throwing some links down below, and we'll give a shout out when your secret project in October comes out then.
Nice. Appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, Nathan. Before we end, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do right now to live their faith fully for Jesus. What challenge do you offer our listeners to put into practice this week?
Well, what comes to mind is that they first need to Google a poem called Think of Others by Mahmoud Darwish. Read that and pray over it, meditate on it, and then find your local Middle Eastern community and start talking to them. Learn from them.
Love it. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being on, Nathan. We can find you online under your name, right? Do you have any fancy social media handles?
Perrin_writer. And my website's nathanperrinwriter.com. You can find my fiction there.
Perfect. I'm sure we will all check that out. And if anybody has questions, they can reach out to you about all that kind of Middle Eastern advocacy and building relationships, interfaith work that you do, which is super awesome. And that's why you are on Theology Meets World, because what you do is super awesome. And I really appreciate you being our guest expert today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. You know the drill with podcasts, so I won't go through all the list, but give Nathan a round of applause wherever you are in the world, and reach out to him if you have any more questions, and follow the show and all that fun stuff. Thank you.